Zethkari pressed his clawed hand against the cold metal wall of the diplomatic ship as it moved through space toward the third planet from the yellow star the humans called Sol. His scales rippled with nervous energy as he watched the blue and green world grow larger through the viewing port. The Veltar had traveled across half the galaxy to reach this small system where a young species had just learned to travel between stars. 50 years ago, the mission was simple but desperate. The Devourers were eating their way through the outer rim of the galaxy like a plague of metal locusts. Every world they touched became lifeless rock stripped of all resources and every living thing. The Veltar Confederation had fought them for 300 years and lost more systems than Zethkari could count on his six-fingered hands. Now they needed allies, even primitive ones. Commander Vexhai entered the observation chamber with heavy steps. His old battle scars showed white against his dark green scales. "The humans have agreed to meet us at their lunar station," he said in their clicking language. "Intelligence reports say they have crude nuclear weapons and basic energy shields. Their ships are slow and their technology is thousands of years behind ours." Zethkari nodded but kept watching the approaching planet. "Why do we waste time with such primitives? They barely have spaceflight. What can they possibly offer against the Devourers?" "Numbers," Vexhai replied. "Their breeding rate is remarkable. They have 8 billion individuals on one planet alone, and colonies spreading to nearby systems. Even primitive warriors can be useful if there are enough of them." The lunar station appeared as a small metal structure floating in the black space near Earth's gray moon. Zethkari had seen Veltar outposts 10 times larger than this crude construction. As their ship docked with the human station, he wondered how these mammals had even survived their own planet, let alone reach for the stars. The airlock opened with a hiss of recycled air. Zethkari followed his commander through the metal corridor, noting how thin and weak the station walls appeared. A human delegation waited in what they called a conference room. The mammals stood on 2 legs and had pink skin covered by colorful fabric instead of natural armor. They looked soft and fragile like the small creatures Zethkari used to hunt as a youth. The lead human stepped forward with a friendly expression. "Welcome to Luna Station. I am Admiral Lisa Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Force." She extended one of her small hands toward Vexhai. "We appreciate you coming such a long way to meet with us." Zethkari watched his commander awkwardly touch the human's soft hand in what they called a handshake. The gesture seemed pointless and weak compared to the Veltar greeting of crossing claws and respect. A male human with short brown hair stood beside the admiral. "This is Colonel Jake Morrison, our military liaison," Rodriguez said. Morrison nodded to both Veltar. "We've prepared briefing materials about our current defensive capabilities and resource allocation protocols." His voice carried no fear despite facing 2 predators who could easily tear him apart with bare claws. The briefing began with displays of human military equipment. Zethkari studied their primitive weapons and crude armor with growing disappointment. Their ships moved like slow cargo haulers compared to Veltar fighters. Their weapons fired simple projectiles instead of plasma energy. Their soldiers wore metal plates instead of bio-armor that could heal itself. "These are our main battle vessels," Morrison explained, showing images of large gray ships bristling with gun turrets. "Each can carry 3,000 crew members and has enough supplies for 6-month deep space missions." Vexhai clicked his tongue in the Veltar expression of mild interest. "Your vessels appear functional for their technological level. How many do you possess? Currently operational?" "About 400 heavy cruisers and 1,200 destroyers," Rodriguez answered. "We can have twice that number ready within 1 year if needed." Zethkari nearly laughed at the pathetic numbers until he noticed something strange. The humans spoke of their primitive fleet with quiet confidence, as if they believed these crude ships could actually make a difference against the Devourers. He had seen entire Veltar battle groups with superior technology get consumed by Devourer swarms in hours. The meeting continued with discussions of supply lines, communication protocols, and joint training exercises. Zethkari found himself studying the humans more closely as they talked. Rodriguez moved with the careful precision of an experienced military leader, while Morrison's eyes constantly scanned the room like a warrior watching for threats. These mammals might be primitive, but they carried themselves like soldiers. Suddenly, alarms began screaming throughout the station. Red lights flashed as a human technician burst into the conference room. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts. Dropping out of hyperspace. Configuration matches Devourer attack patterns." Zethkari felt his blood turn cold. The Devourers had found them. He expected the humans to panic and flee like most species did when facing the galaxy's greatest nightmare. Instead, Rodriguez calmly activated her communication device. "All stations. This is Admiral Rodriguez. Execute Emergency Evacuation Protocol Delta. Military personnel to battle stations immediately." Morrison was already moving toward the door. "Admiral, I'll coordinate the defense platforms. Our fighters can buy time for the civilian evacuation." "Understood, Colonel. Make every shot count." Rodriguez turned to the Veltar delegation. "Commanders, I suggest we continue this discussion aboard my flagship. It appears we'll be testing our alliance sooner than expected." Zethkari watched in amazement as the humans moved with swift efficiency instead of the terror he expected. Throughout the station, he could hear calm voices giving orders and coordinating responses. These primitive mammals were preparing to fight the Devourers without hesitation, despite having no chance of victory. Either they were incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and Zethkari wasn't sure which possibility frightened him more. The human ship called UCS Defiance felt strange under Zethkari's clawed feet as he walked through its metal corridors. Everything seemed too warm and too bright compared to Veltar vessels. The walls were covered with colorful pictures showing Earth landscapes and images of human families instead of the practical gray surfaces he was used to. Soft music played from hidden speakers, filling the air with sounds that served no military purpose. Captain Nina Walsh had assigned him quarters near the human marines he would be working with during their mission to the Kepler system. Zethkari found the arrangement puzzling since Veltar officers always maintained proper distance from common soldiers. As he settled into his small room, he could hear voices and laughter coming from the adjacent areas where the humans gathered. 3 days remained before they reached the contested system where Devourer harvester fleets were consuming inhabited planets. Zethkari expected the humans to spend this time preparing weapons and reviewing tactical data like any sensible military force. Instead, he discovered they engaged in the most wasteful activities he had ever witnessed. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks knocked on his door the first evening carrying a metal tray loaded with different types of food. "Thought you might want to join us for dinner," the human said with a friendly smile. "We're having what my grandmother used to call a family meal." Zethkari followed Ryan to a large room where 30 humans sat around tables eating and talking. Loudly, the conversation jumped between topics that had nothing to do with their upcoming battle. They discussed sports competitions happening on distant Earth, shared stories about their childhood experiences, and showed pictures of their families. On small communication devices, Ryan pulled out his device and displayed an image of a small, human female with curly brown hair. "This is my daughter Emma taking her first steps last month. My wife sent the video just before we left Earth." His voice carried pride and joy as if this tiny achievement mattered more than their military mission. "Why do you share this information?" Zethkari asked, genuinely confused. "Does knowledge of your offspring's development improve combat effectiveness?" Ryan laughed and several nearby humans turned to listen. "Not exactly, buddy. But Emma is the reason I fight. When I'm scared or tired or ready to give up, I remember that little girl needs her daddy to come home. Makes me fight harder than any training or tactics ever could." The concept made no sense to Zethkari. Veltar warriors fought for the glory of their clan and the expansion of their territory. Personal attachments were weaknesses that enemies could exploit. Yet as he watched the humans interact, he noticed something interesting. They moved together like a single organism, anticipating each other's needs and supporting weaknesses without being ordered to do so. Sergeant Amanda Clark approached their table carrying her own meal tray. She was smaller than most human females, but carried herself with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. Mind if I sit? I wanted to meet our Veltar ally. She settled into a chair without waiting for permission and extended her hand towards Zethkari. Amanda Clark, 3rd Marine Battalion. I hear you've been fighting the Devourers for 3 centuries. Correct, Zethkari replied, awkwardly touching her soft hand. My species has lost 47 systems to their consumption. Your people have never faced them in direct combat. Amanda nodded seriously. Then we'll need to learn fast. What should we expect? For the next hour, Zethkari found himself describing Devourer tactics and capabilities while the humans listened with intense focus. They asked intelligent questions about weak points, communication disruption, and boarding countermeasures. Despite their primitive technology, they grasped complex tactical concepts quickly and suggested modifications to standard Veltar strategies. The key thing is protecting the civilian evacuation ships, Amanda said after reviewing the mission. Parameters. Even if we can't destroy the Harvester fleet, we need to buy time for those people to escape. Civilian protection is inefficient, Zethkari replied. Military forces should focus on eliminating enemy assets rather than defending non-combatants, who serve no tactical purpose. The humans exchanged looks that Zethkari couldn't interpret. Ryan leaned forward with a serious expression. Those aren't just non-combatants, friend. They're families like mine. Children who deserve a chance to grow up. Elderly people who've earned the right to live out their remaining years in peace. We don't fight to win battles. We fight to protect the people who can't protect themselves. That evening, Zethkari observed Amanda leading what she called evening training in the ship's gymnasium. He expected to see weapons practice or tactical drills. Instead, the humans engaged in physical exercises that pushed their bodies far beyond comfortable limits. They lifted heavy metal objects repeatedly, ran on machines that moved beneath their feet, and performed complex movements that required balance and coordination. Why do you exhaust yourselves before battle? Zethkari asked Amanda as she completed a series of pull-ups that left her breathing heavily. Because our bodies are all we've got, she replied, wiping sweat from her face. We don't have natural armor like you or built-in weapons. When the shooting starts, our training and conditioning are the only things standing between us and death. The strangest human ritual occurred each night when Captain Walsh broadcast what she called evening messages to the entire ship instead of tactical updates or strategic planning. She talked about the mission's importance and the people they were traveling to help. She reminded the crew about their families back on Earth and their duty to protect innocent lives throughout the galaxy. Tomorrow we enter the Kepler system, Walsh said during her final broadcast. Intelligence reports indicate we'll be facing overwhelming odds against a technologically superior enemy. Some of you may not return home to your loved ones, but remember why we're here. 3 billion people on those planets are counting on us to give them a chance to escape. Their children deserve the same future our children have. That's worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Zethkari listened from his quarters and tried to understand the captain's logic. Veltar commanders motivated troops with promises of victory and glory, not reminders of probable death. Yet the human crew responded with determination rather than fear. They seemed to draw strength from accepting the likelihood of their own destruction. On the final night before battle, Zethkari found himself in the observation deck watching stars streak past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. Ryan joined him, carrying 2 containers of hot liquid the humans called coffee. Nervous about tomorrow? Ryan asked, offering 1 container to Zethkari. Veltar do not experience nervousness, Zethkari replied automatically, though his scales rippled. With anxiety he couldn't name, Ryan smiled. Neither do humans, officially. But between you and me, I'm scared as hell. The difference is I'd rather be scared and fighting than safe and ashamed. As Zethkari tasted the bitter human beverage, he realized something that disturbed him deeply. These primitive mammals were preparing to sacrifice themselves for strangers they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. Their inefficient emotional attachments and wasteful social rituals weren't weaknesses at all. They were the source of a kind of strength that Veltar military doctrine had never encountered. For the first time in his long military career, Zethkari began to suspect that he might be the primitive one. The Kepler system looked like a nightmare when the combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Where 3 beautiful worlds had once orbited their star, only one remained partially intact. The first planet had been completely consumed, leaving behind a lifeless sphere of bare rock. The second planet showed massive strip mining operations where devourer machines carved away entire continents. The third planet still had blue oceans and green continents, but massive harvester ships hung in orbit like metal parasites preparing to feed. Zethkari stood on the bridge of the UCS Defiance watching the tactical displays with growing horror. Thousands of civilian evacuation ships fled from the doomed planets while being hunted by devourer fighter swarms. The enemy fleet was 3 times larger than intelligence had predicted, with bioships that pulsed with organic energy and mechanical vessels bristling with weapons designed to consume rather than destroy. Captain Walsh studied the tactical situation with calm eyes that reminded Zethkari of a predator calculating the best angle of attack. Communications, patch me through to all ships in the fleet. All vessels standing by, Captain, came the reply from a young human technician whose hands trembled slightly as he worked his controls. This is Captain Nina Walsh to all Allied forces. We have 3 billion civilians running for their lives, and not enough time to save them all using conventional tactics. I'm implementing Protocol 7 immediately. Zethkari had never heard of Protocol 7, but he watched Commander Vexhai's scales turn pale at the mention. Captain Walsh, Protocol 7 has never been tested in actual combat conditions. The casualties will be enormous. Walsh turned to face the Veltar commander with steel in her voice. Commander, my people didn't come this far to watch genocide happen because we were too afraid to take risks. We're buying those evacuation ships time to escape, whatever it costs us. The human fleet broke formation and accelerated directly toward the Devourer forces instead of following the careful flanking maneuvers that Veltar doctrine recommended. Zethkari watched in amazement as human destroyers charged straight into enemy battle lines, firing everything they had while smaller fighter craft dove between the massive harvester ships like insects attacking giants. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, take your boarding teams to assault shuttles. We're going after that command bioship, Walsh ordered. Ryan Brooks acknowledged the order and turned to leave the bridge. As he passed Zethkari, he paused and placed one soft hand on the alien's armored shoulder. Stay close to Amanda's team. They'll keep you alive longer than you'd expect. Zethkari followed the human Marines to the shuttle bay where Sergeant Clark was already loading weapons and equipment. Her face showed the same calm determination he had seen in Captain Walsh, as if charging into overwhelming odds was simply another day's work. Listen up, people, Amanda called to her squad of 20 Marines. We're going aboard that bioship to plant explosives in their control center. Intelligence says the corridors will be filled with warrior drones and the walls secret acid that can eat through standard armor in minutes. A young Marine with barely visible facial hair raised his hand. Sarge, what are our chances of making it back to the shuttle? Amanda looked at him with gentle eyes. Honestly, Danny? Pretty slim. But those evacuation ships need 15 more minutes to clear the gravity well. If we can give them that time, 3 billion people get to live. That's worth any price we pay. The shuttle launched from the Defiance and immediately came under fire from Devourer Point defense systems. Zethkari gripped his weapon tightly as the small craft shook and rolled through enemy fire. Through the viewports, he could see human ships exploding all around them while others pressed forward with suicidal determination. The UCS Warrior, a heavy cruiser, deliberately rammed itself into a Devourer harvester 3 times its size. The explosion lit up space like a miniature star, but it cleared a path for civilian transports to escape. Zethkari realized he was witnessing tactics that no sane military force would ever attempt. And yet somehow the humans were succeeding through sheer audacity. Their shuttle penetrated the bioship's hull, and the Marines poured out into corridors that looked like the inside of a living creature. The walls pulsed with veins carrying glowing fluids while the air itself seemed to move with hostile intent. Devourer warrior drones emerged from hidden alcoves, chittering and clicking as they attacked with claws designed to tear through metal. Zethkari fought beside the humans and discovered something that changed his understanding of warfare forever. When Danny, the young Marine who had asked about their chances, took a claw strike that opened his chest armor, Amanda didn't retreat or call for medical support. She simply stepped over his falling body and kept firing while tears ran down her face. "Keep moving," she shouted to her squad. Danny knew what this meant when he signed up. Don't let him down now. The humans fought like creatures possessed, advancing through acid-dripping corridors while devourer drones swarmed around them like angry insects. Every time one of them fell, the others fought harder rather than showing fear. When their ammunition ran low, they switched to blade weapons and continued attacking with desperate fury. Ryan led his team toward the bioship's control center, while Amanda's squad held the corridor behind them. Zethkari found himself caught between the two groups, watching humans sacrifice themselves to protect strangers they would never meet. A massive warrior drone broke through their defensive line and charged directly at him with claws extended. Amanda threw herself between Zethkari and the attacking creature, taking the full force of its claws across her back. She screamed in pain but managed to drive her combat knife into the drone's main sensor cluster before collapsing. As Zethkari helped her to cover, she grabbed his arm with blood-covered hands. "The evacuation ships," she gasped. "Are they clear yet?" Zethkari checked his communication device and saw that 2 more minutes remained before the civilian fleet could safely jump to hyperspace. "Not yet, Sergeant." 2 minutes more. Amanda smiled through her pain and struggled back to her feet. "Then we hold for 2 more minutes, no matter what." The remaining Marines formed a defensive circle around the corridor junction, while Ryan's explosives team completed their mission in the control center. Enemy reinforcements poured toward their position from 3 directions, but the humans refused to retreat even when their position became hopeless. Zethkari realized with shock that he no longer wanted to retreat either. These primitive mammals had shown him something his advanced civilization had forgotten. Sometimes the most logical action was to choose certain death if it meant something greater could survive. As he fired his plasma weapon into the advancing swarm of devourer drones, he understood why humans were truly the most terrifying species in the galaxy. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting because losing was unacceptable when innocent. Lives hung in the balance. And somehow, that impossible determination was turning their suicidal assault into actual victory. The evacuation fleet was escaping because humans had decided that failure simply wasn't an option, regardless of what it cost them personally. When the bioship's control center finally exploded in a cascade of organic destruction, Zethkari was still fighting beside the survivors of Amanda's squad, holding a corridor that should have been overrun 10 minutes earlier. As the enemy ship began to die around them, he realized he had learned something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. True courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was being absolutely terrified and choosing to fight anyway because someone had to. The medical bay of the UCS Defiance felt like a tomb filled with the quiet sounds of suffering. Zethkari lay on a biobed while Dr. Kevin Martinez worked to understand Veltar physiology well enough to treat the acid burns that covered half his scales. The human doctor had been awake for 36 hours straight, moving between wounded soldiers with the same desperate determination that Zethkari had witnessed during the battle. "Hold still," Martinez said gently as he applied some kind of healing gel to Zethkari's damaged arm. "I know it hurts, but this should help your scales regenerate properly." Around them, human medical staff tended to Marines who had survived the bioship assault. More than half of Amanda's squad would never fight again, and several others had died during the evacuation from the collapsing enemy vessel. Yet the humans treated every patient with the same careful attention, regardless of how hopeless their condition appeared. Zethkari watched Dr. Martinez spend 2 hours trying to save a devourer drone that had been captured during the battle. The creature was clearly dying and would provide no useful intelligence, but the human refused to give up. When other staff suggested focusing on their own wounded, Martinez simply shook his head. "Every life matters," he said while working to repair the alien creature's damaged organs. "If we start deciding who deserves to live and who doesn't, we become just like the Devourers," the concept horrified Zethkari. Veltar medical doctrine focused resources on soldiers who could return to combat, not on enemy casualties or hopeless cases, wasting precious medical supplies on creatures that would never provide any benefit violated every principle of military efficiency. Yet somehow the humans managed to save more lives by treating everyone instead of making logical choices about resource allocation. On his third day in the medical bay, Zethkari witnessed something that changed his understanding of human nature forever. Ryan Brooks sat beside a communication terminal reading a message from Earth with his hands shaking. His face had gone completely white and tears were flowing down his cheeks as he stared at the screen. Dr. Martinez approached the lieutenant commander with gentle concern. "Ryan, what's wrong?" "Emma," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. "A Devourer scout group hit the Sol system while we were here. They took out the Mars colonies and 3 Earth orbital stations before our home fleet drove them off." Martinez placed a comforting hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Your family?" "Emma was visiting her grandmother on Mars station when they attacked. The station was completely consumed before anyone could escape." Ryan's voice broke completely as he tried to continue speaking. "My little girl is gone, Kevin. She took her first steps and I wasn't there to see it, and now she's never going to take another one." Zethkari expected Ryan to request immediate transfer back to Earth or at least temporary leave to grieve with his surviving family members. Instead, the human officer sat quietly for 10 minutes, wiping tears from his face. Then he stood up and walked toward the door with something cold and terrible in his eyes. "Where are you going?" Martinez asked. "Back to duty," Ryan replied without turning around. "There are still people out there who need protecting, and Emma would want me to save them." The transformation in Ryan Brooks terrified Zethkari more than anything he had witnessed during the battle. The friendly, warm human who had shared pictures of his daughter was gone, replaced by something that moved with mechanical precision and spoke only when necessary. During tactical briefings, Ryan analyzed enemy positions and suggested strategies with the detached efficiency of a computer. But his eyes burned with fury that never seemed to cool. Amanda Clark had survived her injuries and returned to training. New replacements for her decimated squad. Zethkari found her in the gymnasium teaching combat techniques to Marines who looked barely old enough to be away from their families. These young humans had volunteered for military service after hearing about the casualties from the Kepler system, knowing exactly what kind of survival rates they could expect. Why do they volunteer when they know they will probably die? Zethkari asked Amanda as she demonstrated hand-to-hand combat techniques to a group of teenagers. Amanda paused her instruction and considered the question seriously. "Because someone has to fight, and we'd rather die trying than live knowing we didn't help when people needed us." One of the new Marines, a young woman named Lisa, who couldn't have been more than 18 Earth years old, raised her hand. "Sergeant, my parents want me to transfer to a safer assignment. They say I'm too young to die for strangers." Amanda looked at the girl with understanding eyes. "Lisa, your parents love you and want to keep you safe. That's natural and right. But here's the thing about being human. We don't get to choose when evil shows up in the galaxy. We only get to choose whether we're going to stand up to it or hide from it." "What if I'm scared?" Lisa asked quietly. "Then you'll fit right in with the rest of us," Amanda replied with a gentle smile. "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway." Captain Walsh called a senior staff meeting to discuss intelligence reports about Devourer movements in nearby systems. The news was worse than anyone had expected. The enemy wasn't just consuming worlds for resources, they were learning and adapting faster than any biological or mechanical species should be able to manage. "Every system they take makes them stronger," Walsh explained while displaying tactical charts. "They're not just eating planets. They're analyzing the technology, biology, and tactics of every species they encounter. Within a few more years, they'll be unstoppable. Commander Vexhai studied the data with growing alarm. Captain, if these projections are accurate, the war cannot be won through conventional means. No alliance of species possesses sufficient resources to match their adaptive capabilities. Then we don't fight conventionally, Ryan said from his position at the tactical display. His voice carried the same cold determination that had replaced his former warmth. We fight like humans fight. We make them pay for every system until the cost becomes unbearable. Zethkari realized that the humans had fundamentally changed his perspective on warfare itself. Veltar's strategy focused on preserving forces and achieving victory through superior technology and tactics. Human strategy focused on making defeat so expensive that enemies would eventually choose to stop fighting rather than continue paying the price. The difference was that humans treated every battle as if losing meant the end of everything worth protecting. They fought with the desperation of creatures defending their children, because in their minds they were always defending someone's children. This gave them a kind of strength that couldn't be measured in weapons or armor or technological advancement. As Zethkari prepared for the next mission briefing, he found himself thinking about Ryan's daughter, Emma, and all the other children who had died while their parents fought to protect strangers across the galaxy. The humans were right about one thing: someone had to stand against the darkness, regardless of the cost. For the first time in his military career, Zethkari understood what it meant to fight for something greater than victory. The humans weren't trying to win a war. They were trying to preserve the possibility that somewhere in the galaxy, children would grow up in safety and freedom. That goal was worth any sacrifice, even if it meant embracing the certainty of their own destruction. The realization filled him with a new kind of fear, not the fear of dying, but the fear of failing people who trusted him completely. As he prepared to fight alongside these impossible mammals again, Zethkari began to understand why the Devourers should be afraid of humanity. They had awakened something in the galaxy that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated through superior force. They had created an enemy that would fight until the last breath left their bodies, simply because giving up was unthinkable when innocent lives hung in the balance. The Devourer Command Nexus hung in space like a massive metal tumor, larger than most space stations and bristling with organic weapons that pulsed with deadly energy. Intelligence reports indicated this biomechanical construct was coordinating the systematic consumption of the galaxy's outer rim, processing tactical data from thousands of harvester fleets and adapting their strategies faster than any defending force could counter. Zethkari stood in the briefing room aboard the UCS Defiance, listening to Captain Walsh explain their mission with the calm voice of someone discussing routine maintenance rather than certain death. The combined fleet had tracked the command nexus to this empty system where it was receiving data uploads from Devour forces across 3 galactic sectors. The mission is simple in concept, Walsh said while displaying tactical projections. We breach the Nexus hull, fight our way to the Central Processing Core, and detonate nuclear charges to destroy their coordination network. The difficulty is that this facility is defended by approximately 50,000 warrior drones and has enough firepower to destroy our entire fleet. Ryan Brooks studied the assault plans with the cold intensity that had replaced his former warmth. Estimated survival rate for the boarding teams? Less than 5%, Walsh replied honestly. The Nexus will adapt its defenses as we advance, and we won't have time for careful tactical approaches. This is a direct assault against overwhelming odds with no possibility of retreat. Commander Vexhai shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Captain, Veltar military doctrine strongly advises against operations with such low probability of success. Perhaps we could develop alternative strategies that preserve more of our forces. Walsh turned to face the Veltar commander with steel in her eyes. Commander, while we're developing safer strategies, the Devourers will finish processing the tactical data from 17 more systems and become even more dangerous. Sometimes you have to choose between a bad option and a worse one. Zethkari listened to the discussion and realized he was experiencing something completely foreign to his nature. For the first time in his life, he wanted to volunteer for a suicide mission. The logical part of his mind screamed that this was madness, but something deeper was driving him toward a choice that defied all reason. "I will join the assault team," he announced, surprising everyone in the room including himself. Ryan looked at him with something that might have been respect. "Zethkari, you don't have to do this. You've already done more than anyone could ask." "No," Zethkari replied, understanding something about himself that he had never recognized before. "I have learned what humans fight for, and now I must fight for it too. There are children in the galaxy who deserve a future, and someone must be willing to die to give them that chance." Amanda Clark had rebuilt her Marine unit with young volunteers who knew exactly what kind of survival rates they could expect. As they prepared for the assault, Zethkari watched these humans go through rituals that he now understood were not wasteful at all. They wrote letters to their families, shared stories about their homes, and promised to watch over each other. During the coming battle, Lisa, the 18-year-old Marine whose parents had wanted her transferred to safer duty, sat cleaning her weapon with hands that barely trembled. "Sergeant Clark, do you really think we can pull this off?" Amanda considered the question seriously. "Honestly, Lisa? Probably not. But here's the thing about impossible missions. Someone has to try them anyway. If we don't stop the Devourers here, they'll keep getting stronger until no force in the galaxy can stand against them." The young Marine nodded and continued her preparation. "My little brother wants to be a space explorer when he grows up. I want him to have a galaxy left to explore." The assault force consisted of 200 volunteers from the human fleet and 30 Veltar warriors who had chosen to fight alongside their primitive allies. As they boarded the attack shuttles, Zethkari noticed that none of the humans showed signs of the panic that should have accompanied such hopeless odds. Instead, they moved with the same calm determination he had witnessed during every battle. The approach to the command nexus took place under constant fire from weapons that could vaporize their shuttles in seconds. Half the assault craft were destroyed before they reached the enemy hull, but the survivors pressed forward with the suicidal determination that Zethkari had learned to expect from humans. Their shuttle penetrated the nexus through a breach created by the deliberate sacrifice of the UCS Ranger, which had rammed itself into the facility's main defense grid inside the command nexus. The corridors were filled with a nauseating mixture of organic tissue and mechanical components. The walls pulsed with data streams, while the air itself seemed to carry hostile intelligence. Devourer warrior drones emerged from hidden alcoves by the hundreds, but the human Marines advanced through their defensive positions with the fury of creatures protecting their young. Ryan led the main assault team toward the central processing core, while Amanda's squad held the primary corridor junction. Zethkari found himself fighting beside humans who should have been overwhelmed by fear, but instead seemed to draw strength from their desperate situation. When young Lisa took a plasma burst that melted through her armor, she kept firing until her weapon ran dry, then drew her combat knife and charged the nearest enemy position. "Hold the line," Amanda shouted as Devourer reinforcements poured into their corridor from 3 directions. "Ryan's team needs 5 more minutes to reach the core." The Marines formed a defensive circle that should have collapsed within seconds under the enemy assault. Instead, they fought with such savage determination that the Devourer drones began showing something Zethkari had never seen before: hesitation. These creatures that had consumed entire civilizations were actually retreating from a handful of humans armed with primitive weapons and absolute conviction. As their position became increasingly hopeless, Zethkari realized he was no longer afraid of dying. The humans had taught him something that his advanced civilization had forgotten. Sometimes death was simply the price you paid to protect something greater than yourself. When Amanda fell with claw marks across her chest, he dragged her to cover and took her position in the defensive line. "The core charges are set," Ryan's voice crackled through their communication devices. "Detonation in 60 seconds. All teams to extraction points immediately." Amanda struggled to her feet and looked around at the 6 surviving members of her squad. The extraction point was 3 corridors away through enemy-controlled territory. Their chances of reaching it were essentially zero, but none of the humans even considered surrendering. "You heard the man," Amanda said, reloading her weapon with blood-covered hands. "Time to go home." They fought their way through the Devourer forces with the desperate fury of creatures who had nothing left to lose. Zethkari found himself roaring battle cries in the human language as he fired his plasma weapon into the advancing swarm of enemies. These primitive mammals had shown him what true courage looked like, and he would die fighting beside them rather than live knowing he had failed to match their sacrifice. The nuclear charges detonated just as they reached the extraction shuttle, sending shockwaves through the command nexus that shattered its biomechanical structure. As their craft fled the dying facility, Zethkari looked back at the explosion that was destroying the Devourer coordination network and realized he had witnessed something that would haunt him forever. The humans had won an impossible victory, not through superior technology or tactics, but through their absolute refusal to accept defeat when innocent lives hung in the balance. They had taken a mission with a 5% survival rate and succeeded through sheer determination, paying a price that would have broken any other species. As the shuttle carried them back toward the human fleet, Zethkari understood that he had learned the most terrifying truth in the galaxy. Humans didn't fight like any other species because they weren't fighting for conquest or glory or strategic advantage. They were fighting for the simple belief that children deserved to grow up in safety, and that belief made them unstoppable. Regardless of the odds against them, the Devourers had awakened something in the galaxy that they could never hope to understand or defeat. They had created an enemy that would fight until the last breath left their bodies, not because they enjoyed violence, but because someone had to stand against the darkness. The great council chamber of the Veltar homeworld felt cold and empty as Zethkari stood before the assembled military leadership of his species. 6 months had passed since the destruction of the Devourer command nexus, and he was one of only 3 survivors from the assault force who had lived to tell the tale. His scales still bore scars from the acid burns he had received fighting beside the humans, marks that would never fully heal. High Commander Thex Volum studied the battle reports with the calculating expression that had made him the most respected strategist in Veltar history. Around the crescent-shaped table, other military leaders reviewed tactical data and casualty statistics with the same clinical detachment that Zethkari had once thought represented superior military thinking. "The mission succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections," Thex Volum said in their clicking language. The Devourer coordination network collapsed completely, buying the galaxy at least 5 years to prepare proper defenses. However, the cost was unacceptable by any reasonable military standard. Zethkari remained silent as the High Commander continued his analysis. The numbers were indeed devastating, 90% casualties among the human assault force, with entire Marine units wiped out to the last soldier. By Veltar standards, such losses represented a catastrophic failure of leadership and tactical planning. The humans fought with primitive weapons and inferior armor against a technologically superior enemy, another commander observed. Their victory appears to have resulted from tactical recklessness rather than military competence. "Explain their strategy, warrior Zethkari," Thex Volum commanded. "How did these mammals achieve success through such wasteful methods?" Zethkari struggled to find words that would convey what he had witnessed without sounding like he had lost his military judgment. "High Commander, the humans do not fight for victory in the same way we understand the concept. They fight to ensure that others survive, regardless of the cost to themselves." The assembled commanders exchanged looks that Zethkari recognized as barely concealed contempt. "Explain this concept of fighting without seeking victory," Thex Volum said with the tone one might use when speaking to a confused child. "They measure success differently than we do," Zethkari replied, knowing his words would not be understood. "For humans, victory means that innocent people escape to safety and that children grow up in freedom. Individual survival or tactical efficiency are secondary concerns." High Commander Thex Volum made notes on his electronic pad with obvious disapproval. "Such emotional thinking explains their excessive casualties." Going forward, we will restructure the alliance to utilize human resources more efficiently. They will provide numerical support while Veltar leadership handles strategic decisions. High Commander, I believe that would be a mistake, Zethkari said, surprising himself with his boldness. The council chamber fell silent as every pair of eyes focused on him with shock. Junior warriors did not contradict senior command decisions, especially when those decisions reflected centuries of proven military doctrine. Explain your objection, Warrior Zethkari, Dexvalum said with dangerous quiet in his voice. The humans possess capabilities that our tactical analysis cannot measure, Zethkari replied, knowing he was ending his military career with every word. Their apparent weaknesses are actually sources of strength that make them more dangerous than any enemy the galaxy has ever faced. You speak of primitive mammals as if they were superior warriors, another commander said with obvious disgust. Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. Their tactics are inefficient and their casualty rates are unacceptable. Zethkari took a deep breath and tried to explain something that his own people would never understand. High Commander, I have fought beside humans in battles that should have been impossible to win. I have watched them sacrifice everything to protect strangers they will never meet. They do not fight because they are ordered to fight. They fight because someone must stand against evil, regardless of the cost. The silence in the council chamber stretched for long moments before Dexvalum spoke again. Warrior Zethkari, extended combat exposure appears to have affected your judgment. You will undergo psychological evaluation and reconditioning before returning to active duty. No, High Commander, Zethkari replied, making a choice that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I request transfer back to human forces for the duration of the war. The shock on every face in the chamber would have been amusing under different circumstances. Veltar warriors did not request transfers to inferior units, especially when those units had casualty rates that guaranteed eventual death. You would choose certain death over service to your own species? Dexvalum asked with genuine confusion. I would choose to fight beside warriors who understand what they are protecting. Zethkari answered, The humans taught me that some things are worth dying for, and that knowledge is more valuable than any tactical advantage or advanced technology. Later that evening, alone in his quarters, Zethkari recorded his final message as a member of the Veltar military. His words would be transmitted to human forces and to his own people, though he knew only one group would understand their meaning. Personal log, Warrior Zethkari, final entry. I came to this war believing that humans were primitive mammals, who could provide numerical support for superior Veltar tactics. I was wrong about everything that matters. The humans are not primitive. They are the most advanced species in the galaxy when it comes to understanding why we fight. He paused to collect his thoughts, trying to find words that could capture what he had learned during those terrifying months fighting alongside creatures who should have been inferior in every way. Humans do not fight for conquest or glory or strategic advantage. They fight for the simple belief that children deserve to grow up in safety and that innocent people have the right to live free from fear. This gives them a kind of strength that cannot be measured in weapons or armor or technological superiority. Zethkari looked out his window at the stars and thought about Ryan Brooks, who had lost his daughter but continued fighting to protect other people's children. He thought about Amanda Clark and her Marines who had charged into certain death because someone had to hold the line. Most of all, he thought about young Lisa, barely 18 years old, who had given her life so that her little brother could grow up to explore the galaxy. I used to think courage meant not being afraid, he continued recording. The humans taught me that real courage means being terrified and choosing to fight anyway. They showed me that the most powerful force in the universe is not superior technology or advanced tactics. It is the simple determination to protect others regardless of what it costs you personally. He ended his recording with words that would be repeated in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come, though most species would never truly understand their meaning. If the Devourers ever truly comprehend what drives humanity, they will not try to consume us. They will flee to the darkest corners of space and pray we never find them. Because humans do not fight like any other species in the galaxy. They fight like creatures who would rather die than live in a universe where evil is allowed to triumph. The next morning, Zethkari boarded a transport ship bound for the human fleet, carrying only his personal weapons and a few simple belongings. As his homeworld fell away behind him, he felt something he had never experienced before. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. He was going back to fight beside the most terrifying warriors in the galaxy. Creatures who measured victory not by what they conquered but by what they protected. And when the final battle came, as it inevitably would, he would stand with them against the darkness because someone had to, and he could think of no greater honor than dying beside humans who fought for the simple belief that children deserved a future. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would he. The humans had awakened something in the universe that could not be stopped, reasoned with, or defeated through superior force. They had created hope where none should exist, and that hope would spread from system to system until even the devourers understood that they had made a fatal mistake. They had given humanity a reason to fight, and nothing in the galaxy was more dangerous than humans with a cause worth dying for.